All right, let's go back to one of our top stories now. Inflation has increased for the second consecutive month, and analysts say another interest rate hike is likely to follow. The latest data from SABC shows that annual consumer price inflation was 7.1% in March, up from 7% in February 2023. Xhanti Payi, who's a senior economist at PWC South Africa, joins me now. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News this afternoon. Just explain to us in the simple possible terms what those latest CPI figures mean for us.
Good afternoon again to the viewers. I think the important thing here is that inflation, or the rate at which prices are going up, continues to surprise us. That actually it's higher than what we had been expecting. I think many people were starting to think that that number could start to come down. That means actually less prices and pressure in terms of prices. So now we are finding that from 7% in the previous month, now that has gone up to 7.1%, and particularly because we are seeing pressure in terms of food prices and transport prices. Those are really, really concerning, of course, because those are the big contributors to anything that we as consumers or as people actually deal with.
Xhanti, SABC says over the last year, food inflation grew by 14%. And then when we zoom in there and we look at those different categories, bread and cereal prices increased by 20%. Why are we seeing such an uptick?
Well, I think it's quite clear. We understand that bread is a byproduct of wheat. We don't really produce much wheat in the country, so that has to do with obviously the costs of receiving that wheat and transporting it. As we know also that the big producers of that are Russia and Ukraine. And there has been those problems that we've faced in those two countries in terms of their stability and their ability to support us. So that's been a big thing. But also we know that, many of these suppliers, are also facing the same pressures we are facing in terms of prices. So, well, many for a long time they've been holding back, and I think many of them probably have been absorbing some of those costs. Now are facing a situation in which they have no choice but to pass those on to the consumer, and I suspect that may be very well part of that.
Xhanti, I understand those external forces that you've referred to, like the war in Ukraine, supply chain challenges and oil prices may lead to the increase. But unfortunately, in South Africa, there are also really bad actors in the private sector space. We've seen price gouging before and people taking advantage of bad situations. Is that what we could be seeing here as well?
Well, that's very difficult to see. This is something that has come up from the Competition Commission. But I think, food producers and certainly those associated with them have been really talking about this and saying, look, that is not the case, because you see the margin, and what they actually compared in terms of what the price increase from primary to what to say in the retail well is quite small. And remember that you have to take into account, of course, there's friction costs. So what you will have to pay, for example, from the farmer of wheat or from the producer into the store, onto the shelf, those have increased. We know that has happened. And so it is difficult to say that is the case at the moment. But we know that the things that we think that one of those issues is really trying to understand that. But the explanation has been that it is not of such a nature, at least from the producers and the economists that work on this, that it's not such a nature that we would think that there is price gouging, as it were.
All right, so I'm quoting directly from SABC here. The transport index rose by 8.9% in the 12 months to March. That's down from the 9.9% in February. A slight slowdown of some sorts. Is that any sort of relief or any cause for celebration?
Well, it's not so much of a telling us that they are going to cut, they're cutting their supply. And that means, and we've seen the prices of oil go up. So that is at some point going to filter into our own prices. So that is the big concern. That's why we see this sort of moderating. That is not something that one can expect to last very, very long. And I suspect it's something that will concern the Reserve Bank very, very much.
With inflation up, can we look into a crystal ball and see what the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee may do to try and curb this? And what does that mean for us living in South Africa?
Well, I think that we think that there are two parts to this. The first one that we are thinking about is that, there are all these pressures in terms of what we've just discussed. And we also know that core inflation, that is the inflation that excludes food, that includes transport and energy. And that also is looking very sticky. It's 5.2%. The Reserve Bank has been very concerned that if it does not come down towards that sort of midpoint, that this will be something that continues to concern them and that they may have to act on. But unfortunately, and also worried about expectations, because people will start to think these are actually the increases that we're going to see and bargain on them. But it looks like that the Reserve Bank at this point has very limited space because consumers are under a lot of pressure. We expect that there's also expectations, as we've seen from all forecasts, that actually growth is now actually tending towards zero and may actually turn negative. And that is something that they really have to consider, even if they are that hell-bent in terms of controlling inflation. So their hands are tied, especially because they gave us such a strong and high shot of their dose last time when they increased that interest rate at the dramatic amount they did the last time. So their space to do anything is now very, very, very limited, and they will have to perhaps have to wait it through and sit through. Some people say what is important sometimes is to look through the cycle and see what's going to happen on the other side. So while they may try, but their space is very, very limited.
Okay, Xhanti Payi, who's a senior economist at PWC South Africa. Thanks so much for your time and your analysis this afternoon.